Hello, everyone. My name is Esther. I have a few questions for you. Who is your idol? Who are you proud of? For many of us, of course, the idols are our parents. So were mine. Until I found out a terrible secret about them. I still can't believe they would do such a thing. I was always proud of my parents. It would seem that I had never met such worthy, wise people. I saw in them a constant kindness, and I wanted to be the same. I always tried to do my best at school, behave properly, copy my dad's manners, and think like my mom. I wanted to become the same as my parents in the future, but sometimes we make mistakes. We only see the surface. The more I learned about them, the more I lost respect for them. I was in the 8th grade. As a class, we decided to collect things for the children who had been abandoned by their parents in orphanages. I was taught from childhood to be kind, and I without doubt bought a lot of new things and collected all my childhood toys and books. We decided to not go to an ordinary orphanage, but to the children with disabilities. Over dinner, I told my parents that I was going to the orphanage tomorrow. I've always felt sorry for orphan children, not exactly disabled ones. I believe that childhood is a period when the personality is laid, the worldview is formed, vitality, purposefulness. These qualities do not develop spontaneously, but are formed with full-fledged parental love. I believe that these children not only suffered psychological and physical trauma at birth, but they also have to survive and cope alone. We never discussed this with our parents, and I shared the news with them over dinner. I remember that my father got up and went to his room, and my mother's eyes started to water. I never understood what happened then. The next morning, I decided to apologize and said that I was proud of my parents, and I was sure that they would never do that. We went with the class to an orphanage. I was glad that I had good-natured classmates. We collected a lot of toys, food, and clothing. We planned to stay until the evening, because we had prepared a performance for them. First, the children greeted us, prepared dances, songs, scenes of famous fairy tales. It was very fun. They are so talented. Then we showed our performance, and then there was interaction. No one was bored. The final conclusion was their performances with life stories. Everyone had their own story. One was left by their parents in their home, the other after 3 years of trying to overcome a disease. The other's parents took away their parental rights, and there were a lot of such stories. Every story made me cry. These life stories affected me very much, and different feelings arose. Feelings of guilt, ingratitude, and resentment. The last speaker was a girl, who reminded me very much of my mother in childhood, which I saw in a photo. I don't know why, but at that moment I was very affected by her appearance, and the story made me ask her questions. Her name is Sarah, older than me by 4 years. She was predicted to have cerebral palsy. She was injured during childbirth. I do not know whose fault it was, but at that moment for me, it was her parents who just left her to fend for herself. According to the story, her parents did not immediately abandon her. They left her to her grandmother, but her grandmother died and, at the age of 3, she had to be sent to an orphanage. She remembers them. They visited at first. She told me how she and her grandmother loved each other, remembered her love and warmth, but from others, she never felt anything, unless it caused a feeling of constant pity. In the end, she said that she hopes and believes that her parents will come for her. Maybe they are having difficulties now, and she understands everything. Her grandmother gave her a picture of her parents before she died, and she keeps it by her heart. I really wanted to see it, and even more, I wanted to talk to her, as if I had found a soulmate in her. But the time had come to distribute the collected things and go home, and so I didn't have time. I arrived home very depressed, without mood. My soul was empty. I didn't sleep all night. The stories of all the orphans' lives affected me very much. I especially couldn't forget this girl, who was left by her parents after her grandmother's death. After waiting for dawn, I ran back to the orphanage. I needed to talk to her, to calm down. I wanted to be her friend and help her in any way I could. When I arrived, they had finished breakfast. The teachers recognized me and gave me a chance to talk to her alone. I don't know how many hours we talked. The words didn't end, and I saw myself in her more and more, and she recognized herself in me. It was as if we had known each other since birth. We started telling our secrets, and there was complete trust. I told her about my parents and how proud I was of them. After that, I asked to see a picture of her parents, because she said it was the only thing that remained of them. She kept the photo in her diary, where she wrote letters to her parents every day. I was shocked by what I saw, because they were my parents. My hands started to shake, and the photo was on the floor in a split second. Now images of my grandmother taking care of her played through my mind, and I began to understand why my parents had reacted so strangely, why she had affected me. I was too shocked to say a single word. I went home in silence and in a terrible state. I hoped that my parents would calm me down and say that there was a misunderstanding, that she's not my sister, and the picture isn't of my parents. On the way home, I wrote that we were going to have a serious conversation and asked them to get ready. Mom was home, and Dad had to leave work early. I remember that day very well, the tension in the room. Unfortunately, as much as I don't want to think bad things about my parents, Sarah was my own sister. My mother did not manage to share much with me, but my father told me how hard it was for them to accept such a burden. They were afraid and are still afraid. I found out that they often visited the orphanage where Sarah is located and sponsored, but Sarah didn't know about it. My parents would have told me sooner or later, because you can't hide a secret like that. I admitted that I was disappointed in them, felt lonely, and in my heart doubted their love. I got depressed and didn't talk to them for a week. I was looking for a solution. I had two conditions. Either I go to an orphanage until I come of age, or Sarah will live with us and we will give her a full life. One day, my parents called me and offered to pick up Sarah themselves, and we had a long conversation. They repented, saying that this was the biggest mistake that they had made in their lives. Since then, Sarah and I are the closest sisters. I love her with all my heart. My parents and Sarah also quickly found a common language. I am glad that my parents corrected their mistake, because the child is not to blame for anything.
My name is Daniela. Not so long ago, I had my younger sister by the name of Chloe. I've been dreaming about this for so long because I was an only child in my family. But my joy was not long. After a while, terrible things started happening in our family, and I think my little sister was involved. Parents adopted her at an orphanage. My mother couldn't get pregnant for a long time, but when she did, the baby was born dead. The mother could not believe it, and for a long time she could not recover from such a shock, which served as a discord and a cold relationship with father. They could not have any more children. Everyone pretended that everything was normal so that it would not affect me in any way, but something in me remained, something that from time to time ached in my chest. My parents put it all down to childhood trauma, and they didn't tell me much about their life. They decided that you cannot live in the past and should not drown in grief, and a decent time has passed since this tragedy. I grew up and turned 15. My parents decided to revive their happy family. They finally had another long-awaited daughter, and I have a little sister. This was the path to harmony in the family. If someone can't have children and someone has lost their parents, then why not to help each other? To not brighten up the lives of people who have lost their most valuable things? After all, my parents took a long time to come to this. They had the strength and courage to adopt Chloe. She was 12 years old. My parents wanted a younger child, I will not hide it, but she was a gifted and capable child, which immediately attracted attention to her. Well-mannered, polite, talented, with a great interest in drawing and studying, and a good attitude to all adults and teachers of the orphanage. This set her apart from the noisy and naughty children. Her first day at school was very difficult for her. I supported her in every possible way and accompanied her to school lunch and recess. School children poked at her and called her a foundling. The latter made Chloe lose her temper, and she pushed one of the boys and ran out of the school crying. Months passed, and this boy had a fracture. He was riding at a considerable speed on his bike because he was afraid to get wet on the road because of the rain, and his joy was unlimited because this bike was stolen from him. and he found it a couple of days later in the back of the house. Maybe one of the boys joked, he thought. I thought so too, until I found out that the bike was faulty. His father said something about pedals, bearings, threads. I don't know the details. But I definitely suspect who is involved in this and who went to such a cruel act. It is not to pour a bottle of water on the offender and not to stain the chair with chalk. It was a deliberate intent to harm and take revenge on the person. But who would believe it? And I chose to remain silent, sometimes even doubting my perception. Until the chain of coincidences and accidents began, when children were fighting or getting into trouble, they were seriously injured and severely damaged. Chloe was always there and surprisingly not at all involved. This was a huge noise for our school because it was famous for its reputation of excellent, good, and decent students. The puzzle was quickly put together when, at the insistence of her mother, Chloe was told to stay away from such incidents and pay more attention to her studies, setting me as an example. It all quickly turned into a wild scandal. Mother first questions Chloe's poise, but father, who came home late from work, did not believe his wife and said that this was just a teenage rebellion and she overestimated the importance to it. In the morning, my mother found my dead kitty in her bed, which was clearly smashed with a rock. Immediately, my mother rushed into our room and pulled Chloe out of her bed, and she got up and smiled ominously, as if nothing had happened. Began to comb her hair in front of the mirror and asked what they could do to her. Beat her? Give her back? Daddy won't let me do that. He loves me. At worst, I'll accuse you of periodically beating me up. I hope we understand each other. After this conversation, my mother and I buried the animal. The parents' relationship began to deteriorate because he didn't like his wife's behavior toward Chloe. He wasn't there. He didn't know the whole truth. The final push to discord was the mother's argument that the shelter has no information about the origin of this sinister Chloe. It turned out that she was transferred from another orphanage that burned down in the fire. She was silent for a long time and did not answer questions. Nothing was preserved, and the decision was made to leave her, not to throw her out on the street. I haven't lived with my father since. They moved in with my grandmother. We see each other occasionally, but I don't know what's going on in Chloe's life. And today, I found out that my grandmother died from a gas leak. She did not like Chloe, considered her a stranger and negligent. They blamed it all on my unfortunate father, who long ago got drunk after the divorce and stopped caring for his daughter and participating in her life. It looked like an obvious murder, the motive being the house. Yes, and Chloe confirmed conflicts between her father and grandmother on the grounds of property. I didn't believe it because they had a great relationship. And why would he do that if the house was registered to him and she was helping him live? Just live. Everything was already on her slender shoulders. They decided to send Chloe to our house until she came of age. I wondered why all this was happening. Why is she coming back? No, I understand why. But what can we expect? Revenge? Reprisal? Retribution? What other surprises will present us with the fate of Chloe? Who is she and what is her purpose? I reread and saw a lot of stories about mental illness and abnormalities, movies about children from orphanages, but it all looks like fiction and fiction. No one believes them, and I understand them. I write this with fear and with tears in my eyes. I'm afraid for myself and my mother, and I'm afraid to even imagine the consequences. I'll have to live with her for 3 more years. 3 whole years. If I live to see this day.